Hello there and welcome to another video. So in this video we'll try to learn what are the input and output decorator, what is the purpose of them and where we use them in the Angular code. So let's get started. So I would like to take you to the Angular document page and want to show you what Angular tells about the input and output decorator, and same thing I will tell you in a simple language and from what I know. So input and output, these are two property type of decorators. If you don't know, there are categories of decorators in the Angular, like you have class decorators, you have method decorators, you have property decorators, you have parameter decorators. So these two input and output, they belong to property type of decorator, and the purpose of this to decorator is to pass the data between the components. Now, is it a normal component that you pass the data? Is there anything constraint that you need to think about, like what would be the relationship between the components? So if you are guessing that, yes, you are true, you're right there. There has to be a relationship between your component, and that relation need to be parent to child. So as it says that a common pattern in Angular is sharing a data between parent component and one or more child component. So using input and output decorator, you can pass the data between the components where the relationship between that components is parent to child. It is not applicable to normal any decorator, so any type of components where your relationship is not existing there. So now the obvious question comes to mind that, okay, so if I don't have that relation between my components and I still want to share the data, so for that there are other ways to which you can share the data. For that I will talk in later topics, but for now let's try to see this as a very beginner level. I would say a data passing pattern where you pass the data between the components and they have the relationship like this parent child. So as you can see that this is the hierarchy that we have. We have one parent component selector, and inside that a child component selector is mentioned, and then I have to send the data. So now here we need to understand that what is the difference between @input and @output. So at that input, we use it when we have to send the data from parent to child. So if your direction of data flow is from your parent to child, it can be one parent and the multiple child as it was stated there in the definition. So if you want to pass data from your parent to child, then you will use an input, and there are some changes that you need to do. There are some modifications, some extra things that you need to put in your tag, your selector tag, and through that you'll be able to pass the data from your parent to child. Now, what are those modifications? We'll talk about them also, but the thing to understand here is that if you are passing data from your parent to child, you need to configure your child component with @input. So you need to import this input interface from your Angular core, and you need to create one local variable in your child component where you will specify that extra metadata that this item will come from the parent component. That's why it is input, and then you can also specify what data type it will have, and later then you can use it. It is also important to note that this input will come at the top before the constructor. It should be a part of your class variable declaration zone. It should belong to the top zone, because generally we have the variables which we receive and then we want to use it afterwards, so that's why. Okay, so I'll talk about all the details when I will jump to my VS Code, how to implement and what each line of code means. For now, I will take 2 minutes to just to show you that how these things work and the difference between input and output. So as you can see here, I have app item details, a custom tag which is child selector here, and then item is passed using this syntax of item. If you remember that in the last video, I have talked about property binding, and this is the syntax for the property binding where we use the square bracket. So what they did here in this code, they just binded the current item, a variable, to a property namely item, and this will be used later on in the child component. Now in the output, the direction of a data flow is reverse. You pass the data from your child to parent, and it can be also, like as they said, it can have a multiple child. So multiple child can pass the data to a parent and parent will be listening. So this is more of the event driven. If there is something event happening in your child, like button click or some form submission, it can be any UI events if that is happening, or it can be a manual if you want to put in the code. So it is event driven. This is the important thing to understand. From the child, you can pass data to parent depending on the event. And there are again another interface which is event emitter that you need to configure in your code. So okay, I think that's enough for the document, and we'll go to the code and we'll do some coding here. So I will create one component, namely parent, and another one child, and will implement a simple code that will be handling a data passing. I will create a simple input box in my parent that will accept the user input and then will pass that data to my child. And my idea is to do some modification into a child component, and into a child component again I will emit that data to a parent component. So let's do this. This is the simple pattern basically that we achieve in the parent, sorry, in the input output decorator kind of a pattern. So I'm creating a component, namely parent component. I'll just put the parent and hit enter. We'll do a same stuff for child. There we go. I have my parent and my child component added here in my project structure. So first thing, I will go to my parent. I will write some HTML there. I want simple input where I will get one number from a user, and I want to pass that number to my child component. Okay, so we'll write a code for that. Okay, so this was the input tag for my number. Uh, Now I want to include my child component, and let me check the selector for that. So I can see that the selector is app child. I can even also put the selector as a class. So this time I will do with this class name. I will put dot here, and then I'll be able to use this child's component using the class, namely app hyphen child. So I want to put that in my app component. So I'll go to app component. We'll comment this stuff, or I think let's have this, and I will comment this line. Yes, so I put a parent tag, app parent, and inside that I have my child component, and this time I have referred that using a class because selector I put as a class type of selector using a dot so that I can use it in any element that I want, any HTML element. So here I have used a division tag and provided class as app child. Now let me implement the input property binding, the property binding that I want. Rearrange this code a little bit. I will put only app parent here in my app component, and in my parent components HTML I will put this code that I have a child app child component, and I'll be passing the number from my number. Then let me declare the my number here. So my number is of type number, and initially I have a 0 value to it. Then oops, I put it in the child component. Yes, so what I did, I simply put that line of my app child division in my parent components HTML, and I have my input tag also. Okay, and this my number I have created in my component TS, and the initial value is 0. Now let me quickly create one reference variable here. I'll put a P, and we'll simply use string interpolation to show the my number. So with this, whatever number is entered in this input box, the same I will see below here. I can do this same stuff with a ng model with a two-way binding, but this time I prefer using a reference variable. Okay, so I don't recommend using this reference variable. So I also that it's just an old approach that used to be followed, but I want to show you what is the new one, and I will use an ng model here. So I have my ng model, my number, and the same thing I'm passing to my child component using the property binding. In my TS file, I have that number initialized to a 0, and let me see that I have an error. My input number input. I think it's a renaming related. I have to rename this to my input. Okay, and I think it should have gone now. Yes. Then second thing I want to do is go to child component and there want to create one variable which is of number type, and that is basically have this input. So if I mouse over on it, I can see that this is decorator. Input is a decorator that marks the class field as an input property and supplies the configuration metadata. So it marks this number as an input property that it is going to receive from some another component, and there is some metadata associated with it. Okay, so for now I just will get this data, and I want to bind this to some markup over here. So I will type number. So I'm just showing that on my page, and let me see if I'm able to get that on my UI. So I can see that in my child component, whenever I'm changing this number to anything, this is being shown here. This is a part of parent component, this line, and this is actually part of my child component. Okay, so what I'm trying to do now is, since I have that number from parent component, I want to modify it and send it back to my parent component. So for that, let's implement the code. So similar, like I have the input in my child component, I will create @output. There we go. I have my output property also here, which is new number, and I can specify the type of that new number here, whatever I want. Like if I put a T, which is for the generics, we usually use this syntax in the TypeScript, but for this sake of this topic, I will simply put it as a number. Okay, now I want to create one simple button, and when the user will click on that button, I want to emit an event from the child component that will emit the data to my parent component. So let me do that. So I have a button, and in that button I put a click event, and on a click I want the control to be handled to add 100 method. So this is going to be my event handler. So I will implement this method in my component here, and here I will write a code that will emit the new number in which the 100 is added to a parent component. Yes, so that's all here. I just put this dot new number dot emit. Emit is the as you can see here, that emit an event containing a given value. So this is the method through which it emits that event and the value in it. So we are emitting the value which is this number plus add, and now I want to get this value in my parent component. So to receive the value from child component to parent component, we need to put an event handler here, and the syntax is new number, and I can then specify the method that I have in my component. I will implement the show new number. We'll create a new number variable which will be of type number, and value will be initially 0. This dot new number will be, and this, and remember this event handler, since this is the event handler, it need to have an event parameter in it, so it always accept an argument of event. Yes, so what I did here, I converted that event as a number. I don't need an unknown here. I can simply do like this. This is the typecasting in the TypeScript where I want to convert that value which I received from whatever type it is into a number. So I have assigned that to a new number, and in my HTML I will write some HTML content in a p tag. I want to add some styling to it, so I will go to a CSS, and I have a division ID parent. I put the background color to this blue and padding as 20 pixel. I will do the same stuff in my child, and we'll copy this, but this time I want a different color. So I'll put a background color and the padding at same, and in my HTML I will wrap this stuff inside a div, namely ID. Oops, ID child, and this will go inside my division. Okay, let me format this little. I want to put a break tag also, and in my parent, let me minimize this. I don't need. I have a number entered. I will get rid of this for now. I have an input and a new number. I will put up to here, and now I can see the color is applied. So the blue one is a parent component, and this cyan color one is a child one. And now let me pass the value from here, and I can see that it is being received. So I'll put 100. We'll add 100 to it again, and I can see in back in my parent component that is being added. So if I click it again, it is not going to add again 100 to this 200. It has that statement in which is 100 which it received from the parent, and it's simply going to add it to that 100. So new number that we see here is that is a state that we have received from the child one. So even though I click on this add 100, it is going to do the same stuff. It will check what is the value there in the child component, which is 100, then added 100 to it and coming back and show it here. Okay, so I think that's all for this video. It was very simple to demonstrate the use of the parent to child component relationship and how to pass the data between them using input and output decorator. Now knowing this, you may be thinking that this is not an ideal way in a cases where there is no relationship, such a relationship between the components, and it is very simple that you for each property you put it in one variable, you create one input variable, one output event emitter, and you have to do the stuff. So that's why it is a beginner level, and there are other options also available in the Angular through which you can do it very uh, quickly and very efficiently. Those are like you have the behavior subset which are provided by your RxJX. If you are looking for some advanced and the complex state management, then there is a Redux. For the Redux, we have an Angular version, namely ngRx. So you will be using those options, but it is good to know if you have to pass a simple data through which you want to control the behavior like it. The common scenarios in which I usually use the input and output is if sometime I have to close some pop-up, I want to pass a simple data which is very low in the size, that time I will prefer this. But for the advanced complexities where you have too much of back and forth data flowing, and that time it is not recommended because it is going to make your code look very messier, and you will end up in having an unmaintainable code at some point. So with that, I will wrap up this. Thank you for watching, and I hope you may find this helpful.